Chapter 19, The Cooperatist Alliance. Belgium cooperatism was continually debated internationally. Proponents for both sides were arguing over the pros and cons, advantages and disadvantages, benefits and problems of Belgium's break from the worldwide money system. Capitalists and communists both sought ways to discredit cooperatism. They scrutinized and exaggerated any and all real or alleged shortcomings and invented stories about the discontent of the Belgian people who were, quote, forced to work for free without choice, end quote. The capitalists drew parallels to communism, socialism, and fascism. They painted pictures of anarchy and lawlessness. They insinuated that Belgium had taken a step backward in human progress, reverting to a bartering economy and tribal-type existence. A notable political figure in the United States proclaimed, quote, "A new powerful enemy is on the horizon, and it must be stopped before it spreads, infecting the rest of Europe and eventually the world," end quote. The capitalists kept reiterating that it was a system where individual opportunity and free enterprise were traded away for a communal-type existence where no one was allowed to have more than their neighbors, where no one was allowed to build a better future for themselves and their families, where everyone was mandated to a life and career planned out by a big brother-type government, where everyone was handed everything and no one had the opportunity to earn it, where no one was allowed to fail in life, and therefore, conversely, no one was able to succeed because the meaning of success had been severely neutered. This group was so opposed to cooperatism that they refused to listen to anything to the contrary. They refused to visit Belgium and held very firmly to the conservative views, dubbing Belgium, quote, "the destroyer of individual freedom," end quote. Communist leaders were also against it because it didn't allow for single-party control. It didn't allow for a ruling class, a ruling faction. It didn't allow for any means, force, or wealth to gain power. The capitalists maintained it didn't allow for enough individual freedom, and the communists insisted it allowed for too much. Many of these governments attempted to make it difficult for their citizens to travel to Belgium, concerned that they may be exposed to and bring back an entirely different perspective than the one they wanted to officially promote. Given the degraded economic state of the world, which was still a long way from recovering, these governments realized that cooperatism offered an alternative to the common man's economic frustrations, making him susceptible to the enticements of this new system. This was to be avoided at all costs, for they did not want a revolution on their hands. Those that were able to visit Belgium, the majority of which were Europeans, learned that Belgians were content and happy under their new system, and all lived free, stable, and secure lives. The foreign medias would claim that tourists were only shown what the Belgian government, which didn't even exist anymore in the way they were using the term, wanted them to see, and that the actual reality was quite contrary. An information war ensued. Although many governments discouraged tourism to Belgium, Belgium encouraged it. The Belgians wanted to share their experience with the rest of the world and tried to make it easy for foreigners to visit their country. When a foreigner visited Belgium, they would pay a daily, weekly, or monthly fee to the International Belgium Foreign Relations segment through its Swiss bank account. This payment would be in the currency of their native country, and for this fee, they could freely participate in the Belgian system of cooperatism for the duration of their stay. There was no need for them to carry any money with them. They were entitled to food, transportation, living quarters, etc., same as if they were a citizen, except they wouldn't be allowed to leave with any excessive goods or products, other than a reasonable number of souvenirs. They were simply provided with what they needed while in Belgium, much like any Belgian citizen. There was no cost to Belgium for providing tourists with these products and services. The people agreed to adjust the workforce so that it could be flexible and versatile enough to accommodate the fluctuations that occurred due to visitors. We learned this from a citizen of that time. Quote, "Certainly there was underground bartering going on. Foreigners would often carry currency with them and successfully attempt to entice us to part with something for a payment in this foreign currency, which we could then use to purchase things from vacationing foreigners or save it and use it for when we decided to visit that country. Domestically, it had very little use for us because there was nothing we really needed to buy under cooperatism. I knew some people who would use it to barter in precious metal commodities, even with other Belgians. And you'd think that this type of currency bartering would create some adverse effects for the cooperatist system in general. But the reality was, although this kind of underground bartering was common, cooperatism was never in danger of being undermined or compromised. People were very content with their way of life and had no wish to usurp it. Underground bartering was more of an entertaining, intriguing venture rather than some sort of lucrative black market money-based industry. It was considered more of an occasional novelty for those who chose to indulge in it." End quote. For Belgians who had friends or relatives living abroad, often the friends or relatives would pay for their Belgian counterparts' visit to their country and earn an equivalent vacation for themselves to Belgium under a friends and families agreement with the Belgian foreign travel segment. Foreign currency funds collected by the foreign travel segment were used to allow Belgians to travel abroad using the currency of the country they were visiting. When tourists came to visit Belgium without any specific arrangement, the fee they paid would be placed in this coffer of foreign funds for that particular country, thus allowing Belgians to vacation in other countries using these funds. Therefore, Belgians welcomed foreign visitors and tourists, knowing that this gave them the financial means to go abroad. For Europeans in particular, vacationing in Belgium was a good value, and this, coupled with curiosity about cooperatism, gave rise to a tremendous increase in Belgian tourism. Alpha City remained a highly popular vacation destination, although after the national transition, maintaining the attractions was no longer part of the workforce as it had been in the past. We learned this from a longtime resident. Quote, "After the transition, Alpha City had become an urban center in its own right, separate from its resort aspects. The workforce in Alpha City functioned in the same way as the workforce anywhere else in the country, providing the rudimentary necessities of everyday modern living for area residents. However, for us longtime Alpha City residents, there was so much history here as far as the resort and attractions were concerned that although running and maintaining the attractions was no longer a workforce function, if enough of us were willing to donate our time, we could keep the magic of the resort and all of its wonderful attractions intact. At this time, there were quite a few of us that had retired from the regular workforce, and we decided we'd take it upon ourselves to maintain the attractions. There are even a lot of younger people still in the workforce that chip in and help us out as well. We make it fun. Nobody's under any obligation. We devise our own scheduling and duties, keeping it very loose. We have a good time with it, and there are enough of us that we can keep the whole show going for visitors. They enjoy it, we enjoy it. It's part of what makes Alpha City what it is. Hopefully, future generations will continue the tradition, or at least preserve the place where it all started." End quote. Airline services now fell under the transportation segment of the workforce, and it was decided by the citizenry that it was in the best interest of Belgium for Belgian Airlines to continue to accommodate an international clientele. Belgian citizens obviously flew for free. All others paid a very reasonable rate, which went toward any international expenses that the airlines incurred, and then to the foreign relations segment, adding to the funds available for Belgians to travel abroad. Belgian Airlines quickly became a favorite for many foreigners traveling to and from Belgium. Foreign airlines paid a terminal fee at the Belgian airports, which was used to pay the terminal fees Belgian airlines had in foreign terminals. This was basically a wash. The Belgian airports waived the fee for a foreign airline if that country's airports waived the fee for Belgian airlines. This became more and more common as time passed. It ultimately made sense for both countries involved, since the fee was simply a formality and added to the bookkeeping of the foreign country. The populations of Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Finland were considered to be more socialistic in philosophy than many of the other Western democratic countries because of their policies of national benefits for their populations, such as health care and higher education. In reality, they were more of a mix, because the industry in those countries was almost entirely privately owned and operated, keeping them firmly entrenched in capitalism with overtones of socialism. The money system was still the dominant driving force in these countries. However, the general populations were more intrigued and open to the idea of cooperatism. The common people in the Netherlands and Luxembourg, due to their close proximity to Belgium, were also highly influenced by the events in Belgium. As Belgian cooperatism proved stable, advantageous, and therefore successful for Belgium and its people, especially in the wake of and against the backdrop of the devastating effects of the World Depression, a slow transition began to take place in these 6 European countries. Cooperatism was no longer just an idealistic dream, but a tangible reality, as the Belgian experience had so definitively shown. It was workable. It was viable. Belgium was very supportive of this change that was rolling through these countries. It did what it could to encourage it without jeopardizing the favorable international relations it enjoyed with their governments and administrations. The people of the Netherlands were the first to demand cooperatism. Civil unrest ensued. Those who were opposed held a great deal of power and mounted a formidable resistance to this change, and were able to stave it off for quite some time. But the movement was too potent, and this eventually became obvious, even to those in power. It was only a matter of time before a revolution would take place, forcing the inevitable outcome. The transition was not without issues, problems, and a great deal of internal violence, which at times reached the intensity of civil war. Changing to cooperatism was in many ways far more difficult in the Netherlands than it had been in Belgium, because the economy, though only a shadow of its former pre-depression self, was functioning to some degree. And because of this, many people clung to the little economic advantages they had. Whereas in Belgium, it had collapsed entirely. The average citizen had no reason to hang on to the money system. Dietger Gillard, a native Belgian, is credited with suggesting that if a population wished to effect a transition to cooperatism in their country, but was bitterly opposed and blocked by the controlling elite, that their best strategy would be, as a group, to destroy the economy and the government's ability to fund its policies. This could be accomplished by simply severely curbing their spending and refusing to pay taxes, causing an economic depression from which there could be no recovery. And at the same time as they are boycotting the economy, they should begin working together on a local level to maintain essential products and services for everyone. Of course, he warned this must be performed by a very significant portion of the population in order to be effective. This became known as the Gillard technique and was seen by many staunchly capitalistic countries as outright treason, and therefore the suggesting of it by Gillard as an act of war. In fact, many of the elite and their supporters tried to use this as a means to actually declare war on Belgium, which of course never materialized. The economies were too fragile at this time to support it, and the common people could not be motivated to such a cause. Gillard's tactics were attempted intermittently and sporadically by various small groups in the Netherlands, and because of the low numbers, they were only mildly effective at first. However, it was enough to begin a small landslide that soon led to a devastating avalanche. The economy began to crumble, making it easier for people to let go of their fears and hesitancy and begin to fully participate in and even embrace the transition. Although the transition of the Netherlands was more difficult than for Belgium, it also had some tremendous advantages. It had the advantage of knowing where it was headed. It had a fully functioning, working Belgian model to be guided and inspired by. It also had a great deal of sympathy and support from the Cooperatist factions in these other 5 European countries who were also showing signs of taking similar transitionary steps. Eventually, the Cooperatists grew to a deciding majority. Violence gradually subsided once the outcome became obvious and inevitable. The Netherlands was able to quell its internal turmoil, convert its economic-based workforce to a cooperativist workforce, and begin to function as a cooperative society. Those in power gave way to the will of the people and either fled the country with as much of their wealth as they could, or they accepted the change and remained. Belgium's isolated status as the sole cooperative country in the world now changed to one of 2. They formed the Cooperatist Alliance, which mutually benefited them both. They established an open-door policy between them. Belgians could move to the Netherlands and vice versa. Cooperativism allowed for and easily accommodated this type of migrating freedom. As new potential workers entered or left the country, the workforce could be and was adjusted to accommodate these changes. Industry was reorganized to be as versatile as possible with regard to the population fluctuations. An individual's years of service were documented and shared between these countries. Years of service in one country would carry over to the other. So, if you had met your required number of years in the workforce, then you were considered retired in either of these countries with full retirement status. Luxembourg was the next to convert, and although there was opposition, the transition of this country was relatively violence-free. Again, being in such close proximity to Belgium, the majority of the common people were already in agreement that this was to be their future. It was quite obvious, long before any steps were taken, that there was overwhelming support for this. A cooperativist administration was simply voted in to no one's surprise, and the national conversion was accomplished with very few problems. The smaller physical size of the country made the transition that much easier to accomplish. There were now 3 countries in the Cooperative Alliance: Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. There was some concern at this point among the other Western nations regarding the impact of this minor spread of cooperativism. The capitalists remained wary and doubled their media efforts using these recent developments to warn the world how this plague was already starting to spread, destroying liberty in the process. Denmark, Norway, Sweden, and Finland had always had relatively high numbers of League members since the League's formation. A large percentage of immigrants to Belgium during the Great Migration came from these countries, and each of these countries had a cooperativist party on their ballots, and the common populace felt a strong affinity with the cooperativist philosophy. Historians tend to agree that at some point, one of these 4 countries would have been the first to convert to cooperativism had history played out differently. The 2 most prominent factors in Belgium becoming the first cooperativist country had been A, the building of and success of the Alpha City project, and B, Belgium's economy being so completely decimated by the World Depression. Had these 2 factors not aligned at that time, then the general consensus is that one of these 4 other countries would have ushered in the cooperativist era, but probably at a much later date. Although the World Depression had been devastating for everyone, these 4 countries were able to weather the blow far better than Belgium and therefore salvaged a ruined but not irrecoverable economy. The Cooperatist parties in these countries made a strong bid for their conversion at this time, but people had enough hope in their leaders' plans for economic recovery that a majority of the populace were not willing to risk it all against a dubious Cooperatist conversion. However, given the shocking, amazing, and most importantly, the highly successful conversion of Belgium, coupled with the not so successful economic recovery, cooperatism gained a new fervor among these nations. And even as the Netherlands was heading toward national upheaval, the pendulum was beginning to swing back toward a cooperative direction for Denmark and Sweden in particular. The scenario in each country was similar to what had transpired in the Netherlands: civil unrest, a dividing of the country between the wealthy elite and the general public, a certain degree of domestic violence from the fanatics on both sides, those in government using all of their influence and power to sway an outcome in their favor, followed by the inevitable majority vote in favor of the Cooperatists, despite a valiant resistance from those whose best interest was served in keeping the status quo. There were certainly many differences in the details with regard to how the change actually occurred in each individual country, but the general path was similar. One significant difference between what occurred in the Netherlands and what occurred in these latter four countries was the evidence of a fair amount of covert action taken by several of the stronger capitalistic countries, Germany, England, and the United States, as well as communistic Russia. In the days before the World Depression, this type of action would have been significant enough to have a high impact on the outcome of these transitions, possibly enough to tip the scales in favor of the resistance. However, after the Depression, these former economic strongholds no longer found themselves financially able to divert the amount of funding to these types of causes as they once did. Consequently, their combined efforts came up short. Sweden, then Denmark, happened in very close succession, followed a short time later by Finland. Norway had the strongest opposition and therefore proved the most difficult. More of the general populace was wavering on the fence and remained undecided, and because of this, it appeared as though the staunch capitalists and conservative factions might prevail, especially with the minor but helpful aid from the aforementioned sympathetic allies. But the overwhelming support from the other neighboring transitioned countries and a large enough segment of the population implementing Gillard's technique tipped the balance in the Cooperatists' favor. These countries were added to the Cooperatist alliance, bringing their total to 7 altogether. This marked the beginning of the end for capitalism, communism, fascism, and all the other ideologies present in the world at that time. These transformations were very significant to the controlling elite of the countries in the capitalistic West. Even leaders in the communistic countries realized it threatened the control they held over the general population in their respective countries. This new 7-country alliance and the intimate connection these countries had with the entire European continent meant the common people throughout the rest of Europe and beyond would no longer be swayed concerning the truth about life in these 7 countries. People, the common people, were waking up. The countries in the Cooperatist alliance became more and more unified, sharing ideas, ideologies, philosophies, citizens, technologies, and resources. This was the beginning of the transition toward worldwide cooperatism, which then paved the way for the age of automation.